Now that Joe Biden is President of the United States, I still find myself bemused by how much faith Christians have in politics. How is it possible for us to claim Christ as our Savior while idolizing a president and a political process? I understand why non-Christians would put so much faith in politics. They don't have anything else to put faith in. But not Christians. Christians should know exactly who to put their faith in. So why are we demonstrating to the world that we don't think that God is in control? Seriously, that's what Christians are saying when they seek the overthrow of a political process or go into despair when they can't. So maybe this is a good opportunity to contemplate our faith. Also, in this video, I talk about false prophets of profit, the Q Hoax, and your security. Welcome to the Shotcast. I'm John Little, recording on a cool Saturday night, January 23rd, 2021, here in southern Taiwan. If you want to see more of these videos, hit like and click subscribe. Also, whack that little bell. It actually helps. Also, subscribe to the Shock Letter at theshockletter.com for free. You can also find my posts on Facebook and Twitter, and yeah, I'm still tweeting on Twitter. And the links for all of that and more are in the description section below. Most important of all, thank you for praying for this ministry. The world is getting really bad and really fast, and I want to make sure that you understand what is happening so that you can serve the Lord in these last days. And now, let's get to today's topics. Tonight we talk about, did you have faith in politics? The false prophets of profit, the Q Hoax, and then we'll talk about security. And in the main article on omegashock.com, there are always lots of great links that I found over the previous week. So, did you have faith in politics? A couple weeks ago, I was reading articles on Martin Armstrong's website, armstrongeconomics.com, when I came across a comment from one of his readers that struck a chord with me. Quote, "I think everyone is doomed. There is nothing to stop them. They have the media, they have the courts, they have the academic institutions, they have the public brainwash, they have the big corporations. They eliminated small business, they eliminated the First Amendment, they have people believing all conservatives are evil. They have everything. There is nothing left. There is nothing to stop them ever. They can and do what they want," close quote. Again, that was a comment from a subscriber to Martin Armstrong's services, and I'm betting that you feel some of what this distraught reader feels. And to my dismay, I feel a little bit of this myself. More recently, an Omega Shock reader said some of the same kinds of things. Quote, "I'm feeling pretty discouraged right now. I know all of this evil has occurred and has to occur before Christ returns, but starting to feel like putting my head in the sand and disappearing. So tired of watching these evil people get away with their blatant crimes, knowing they are laughing at us cattle. And really tired of trying to inform people who think I'm crazy for believing in Pizzagate and their other evil atrocities that are so in our faces. I can't even look at most famous people without thinking about what they might have done or still doing to keep their positions. Really feeling alone and like I have no purpose," close quote. That probably hits even closer to home. I feel a lot like that, too. It's part of the reason why I started Omega Shock. It was my way of pushing back, doing something, warning people. So I completely understand if you feel upset, discouraged, beaten, and demoralized. It's perfectly natural. In fact, if you didn't, there might be something wrong with you. I feel that way. I feel like all this a lot of the times, which is one of the reasons why I would give up writing Omega Shock articles or recording Shockcast videos in a heartbeat if people stop supporting this ministry. Seriously, if you want me to give up this ministry, I will gladly do so. Writing computer manuals isn't as painful as having to write these articles or produce Shockcast videos. But I'll keep doing them as long as you help me pay the bills. Deal? Anyway, a huge and grateful thank you to all who have stepped up to aid this ministry. May God bless all of you for your generosity. However, the biggest difference between you and me is that I've lived in Asia for 25 years, and that gives me a unique perspective on evil and the megalomania of powerful elites that someone from Bucksnort, Nebraska might not have. It has allowed me to see that people are the same everywhere. It allowed me to see how awful American foreign policy is and how it will be under a Biden administration. And I've been able to see how much America changed over the past 30 years because I'd spent so much time on the outside. Of the past 28 years, I've probably spent just about 3 of them back in the United States. And that short amount of time was more than enough to remind me of what's wrong with the U.S. and where it was going. Let me explain. The average American in 1992, when I left the U.S., was more honest, had more integrity, and was more grounded in reality than the Americans I see today. When Bill Clinton was caught cheating on his wife, he had a tough battle on his hands. People expected more of their politicians in the 90s, and the politicians had to be a lot more careful about letting people know that they were utterly corrupt. And yes, politicians have always been horrifyingly corrupt. I bet that if we look carefully at all the politicians in American history, we'll probably find that most of them committed treason at one time or another. I can certainly say that when I was growing up in the 60s and 70s, politicians were also utterly and treasonously corrupt. They were just more careful about it. Now it doesn't matter. No one cares if a president or congressman or senator is unfaithful to his wife or her husband. No one cares if they lie, cheat, or steal, or even share secrets with the enemy. Well, that's not completely true. Some people care. You care. But you and I are a part of a rapidly shrinking group of people who believe that leaders should be honest, have integrity, and be faithful to their spouses. Worse, there are fewer and fewer Christians who feel the way that we do. And as the followers of Christ stopped caring about honesty, integrity, and fidelity, the American political system became more and more corrupt. I mean, when I left the U.S. in 1992, all single young men were wondering if you should kiss on the first date. When I returned in 2006 for a couple of years, that wasn't the question anymore. Anyway, I think that I understand how this crept up on you. You've been like the proverbial frog in the pot that is slowly being brought to boil. The corruption and destruction of the system has been happening so slowly that you haven't really seen it, at least from the inside. Even those of us like myself who saw some of what was happening are still surprised at how bad things have gotten. Even as I sit here wondering about what brought us to such an awful situation, I'm still not completely sure when America stopped being a democracy or a republic. I have my suspicions, but I'm betting that a good statistician could show us when our republic fell. If I had to bet, the fall of the republic probably happened in the late 60s and early 70s, and it all centered around the contraceptive pill, invented in 1960, abortion on demand in 1973, Operation Gladio from 1956 to 90s, CIA drug running out of the Golden Triangle from the 50s up until the 21st, our century, the rise of socialism in universities, television, and the collapse of morality in seminaries and churches. All of those events had their beginnings before the late 60s, but they didn't really become visible until we saw the Summer of Love in 1967 and Woodstock in 1969, and the escalation of the Vietnam War in 1964. Sex without consequences, never-ending war with never-ending atrocities, and a flood of CIA heroin from the Golden Triangle were horribly destructive to the morality and psyche of America. But I believe that the worst event of all was the massive Holocaust against our babies, murdered in the womb. When you murder 1 million babies a year, something spiritual happens to a nation. Something dark takes over. And it's even worse when Christians are murdering their own precious children. I'm sure that you could add your own turning points, and I welcome your input in the comment section below. But the shedding of innocent blood, especially by Christians, has got to have a profound impact spiritually that overshadows almost anything else. My suspicion is that all the corruption that we are seeing is just icing on the cake. Please understand that it is what Christians do that matters most. When the children of God commit sin, the effects are far, far worse than the sin of those who are not children of God. That is everywhere in the Bible. My point is that America probably lost her democratic republic about 50 years ago. The fact that we are only just now seeing how much we have lost is a testament to how long these things take, and even to the good men and women who did their best to push back against the sin and wickedness that we invested ourselves in. I guess the question that I have now is, when did Christians start believing in politics? When I was a kid, no one trusted the government. No one. Everyone was suspicious of politicians. No one believed a congressman or senator when they talked about honesty and integrity. We all knew that they were self-serving persons of uncertain parentage. So when did that change? When did Christians and other Americans start to believe in politicians again? I remember Jerry Falwell and the moral majority, which wasn't exactly moral or even a majority. But the name was catchy and Christians flocked to Falwell's banner. But the moral majority could not have taken off without a change in how Christians thought about politics. And no, I'm not saying that Christians cannot or even should not get involved in politics. I'm not saying that at all. If involvement in politics helps further the good news of Jesus Christ or glorifies God in any other way, go for it. We all need jobs and the ability to pay the bills. But that's a far cry from what we've been seeing recently. Just look at the big protests in Washington, D.C. You can bet that almost all of them claim to be Christian. I'm even betting that most of those who broke into the U.S. Capitol building would claim to be Christian. Except for that buffalo shaman guy who runs around half naked in buffalo horns. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not against the idea of letting our overlords know that we don't like what they are doing. They need to know, and I'm willing to tell them. A protest is one way of doing that if it's helpful and good for society. But there's a big difference between holding a protest and believing in government. I believe that God is against Christians looking to government to fix their problems. And he's against Christians worshiping politicians. And that goes for the Christian adoration of Donald Trump. Was he a better president than the previous four combined? Yeah, I'm pretty sure that I can say that. But that's a really, really low standard to meet. You can't get much worse than the four guys who came after Reagan. Being better than them did not make him the savior of America. For crying out loud, Trump isn't even a Christian. He doesn't even try very hard to look like one. When was the last time Donald Trump went to church? I mean, really honestly, going to church because he wanted to go. I've never seen him do that. Not once. How many wives has Donald Trump had? Was he faithful to any of them? Yet I am barraged with MAGA Christians who talk about the Donald as if he were someone more than he is. They talk about him as if he were some special avatar of God sent from above to make America great again. I'm not saying that he needs to be a Christian. Very few American presidents were very Christian at all. Washington wasn't, Jefferson wasn't, FDR wasn't, JFK wasn't. It would be great if they all were, but it's not necessary. So I didn't mind if Trump wasn't a Christian. What I mind is the cult of politics that Christians have joined. And this cult of politics is far more than just being MAGA. If you call yourself a patriot, you've joined a political cult. I don't like saying that because my family fought and died for America from its very beginning. I have family who currently serve in the military and family who are veterans. With my background, I should be the last person to tell you what I am saying right now. But I have to love God more than anyone or anything on this planet. Everyone and everything is such a distant second to my love for God that they might as well not even be there. Following Christ trumps everything. Literally, everything. Jesus was an Israeli, yet he obeyed the illegal and immoral conquerors of Israel. Paul was an Israeli, yet he obeyed Nero, who was an awful and evil man. Paul even wrote Romans 13 while Nero was in power. None of the godly men and women in the Bible were patriots. If anything, the many examples of evil men in the Bible were the true patriots. I could talk about all those men and women in the Bible who chose country over God, but not here. But having said all that, I actually can say that Donald Trump was a servant of God, but not in the way that MAGA Christians think. He was as much a servant of God as both Bushes, Clinton, and Obama, and now Biden. He and all the other corrupt politicians of uncertain parentage were put in power by God for all the reasons described in Romans 13. And let me remind you again that the Apostle Paul wrote the book of Romans while one of the most awful emperors, Nero, was in power. Nero was one of the worst rulers ever, and Paul said that you had to submit to him. He was a violent, petulant, debauched, and corrupt ruler who murdered anyone and everyone that he suspected of disloyalty. Yet Paul said this about him in Romans 13, quote, "Every person is to be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those which exist are established by God. Therefore, whoever resists authority has opposed the ordinance of God. And they who have opposed will receive condemnation upon themselves, for rulers are not a cause of fear for good behavior, but for evil. Do you want to have no fear of authority? Do what is good, and you will have praise from the same. For it is a servant of God to you for good. But if you do what is evil, be afraid, for it does not bear the sword for nothing. For it is a servant of God, an avenger who brings wrath on the one who practices evil. Therefore it is necessary to be in subjection, not only because of wrath, but also for the sake of conscience. For because of this you also pay taxes, for rulers are servants of God, devoting themselves to this very thing. Pay to all what is due them, tax to whom tax is due, custom to whom custom, respect to whom respect, honor to whom honor." Close quote. Romans 13, 1-7, New American Standard Bible. I don't enjoy being obedient to corrupt rulers. I don't like paying taxes or even following speed limits. But we are required by God to obey those who are in power and to even die if they demand it of us. The only thing that we cannot do is obey laws that require us to disobey God. Do you remember that Paul appealed to Nero for judgment? Did Paul ever complain about the injustice of being killed for being a Christian? He did not once. And when it came time for Nero to murder him, Paul went to his death willingly. Was it right for Nero to murder Paul? No, absolutely not. It was a foul and evil thing for Nero to do. But dying at the hands of evil is something that we Christians have been required to do for thousands of years. And we should expect nothing less, especially if we ourselves have been thoroughly evil. The abortion rate among Christians is only a little less than for those who are not Christian. We divorce each other almost as much as non-Christians. We consume pornography almost as much as non-Christians. We have sex outside of marriage almost as much as non-Christians. We fight and argue over the smallest things almost as much as non-Christians do. We have become so much like the world that it's hard to see what being a Christian actually means. Our pastors are corrupt. Our Bible translations are corrupt. Our seminaries are corrupt. Our missionaries are corrupt. And yeah, I've seen corrupt missionaries. And when you point any of that out, most Christians do not want to hear it. Most Christians in the U.S. think that they can make America great again. And that's just not true. America can never be great again as long as we Christians are murdering hundreds of thousands of innocent children every year. That's right, American Christians. America can never be great again as long as half of all pastors are regular consumers of pornography. America can never be great again as long as American Christians embrace immorality, deception, and idolatry. If American Christians became good, upright, decent, and God-fearing, then maybe America could be great again. But until that time, it just isn't going to happen. America deserves Joe Biden and the corruption of American politics. We did it to ourselves, so it is only just and right that we pay the price for our disobedience to God. We did this. It's our fault. Now we pay. Next, the false prophets of prophet. Of all the things that make me mad, and there are a lot of them, there is one thing that I absolutely despise that has become really obvious, and I believe that God hates it as even more than I do. False prophets. There was a horrific amount of corruption among Donald Trump's spiritual advisors. At least some of them were horrible human beings and liars for fun and profit. They sold their souls for power and money. They did it for fame and fortune, and it should be clear that they didn't do it for God. Paula White, Kenneth Copeland, and Jerry Falwell Jr. should all be recognizable to you for the corruption that they have been involved in. And there is evidence about others in that group that would make me want to leave any church that allows them to preach. But there's more. Go look at all the demonstrably fake prophets and prophecies about how Donald Trump would have a second term in office. Every one of those men and women were false prophets. Every single one. They said, "The Lord told me." And it is clear that the Lord did not tell them anything. And we need to mark those men and women and never ever trust what they have to say ever again. Here are a few that were clearly false prophets. Lauren Sanford, Jeremiah Johnson, Chris Vallotton, Mark Taylor, Pat Robertson, Paul Begley, Jonathan Kahn, Kat Kerr, Charlie Shamp, Dave Hayes, Sean Bowles. And there are a host of others that we could probably find that gave false prophecies. And every one of them, by definition, is a false prophet. And even if they apologize for their false prophecies, and some have, they still cannot be trusted ever again. Period. Don't get me wrong. There's an eternal world of difference between a prediction and a prophecy. Making an honest guess and getting that guess wrong does not make you a false prophet. Predictions are not prophecies. Even if you have a dream that seems prophetic, it doesn't make you a false prophet either. I'm sure that we've all had dreams that didn't turn out like we thought. But when someone says, "Thus saith the Lord," and it turns out wrong, that person is a false prophet. Period. I'm not saying that a false prophet is not a Christian, but I am saying that they cannot be trusted ever again for any reason. It's time for Christians to stop listening to false prophets. It's time for them to stop following fancy tales and lying delusions. It's time to start listening to what the Bible actually says and not what you want it to say. If you don't love the actual truth, there's literally no hope for you. Next, the Q Hoax. There's a delusion that has made my skin crawl for more than the past couple of years, and I now call it the Q Hoax. I don't think that I've ever said a positive thing about Q. I might have had some hopes that at the very beginning that they might have been real. The idea that Trump was going to drain the swamp was compelling, but what Q was saying did not make sense in the real world. And as the days and weeks and months wore on, it became more and more clear that Q was an utterly foul hoax. The question is, did any of the Q followers learn a lesson about this hoax? If you still believe that Q was real, please stop reading now, stop listening, and go somewhere else. I mean that. I have no interest in wasting my time trying to help those who love lies more than the truth. If you were a follower of this Q hoax and have not repented of this, with all the proof that we now see, get out. I want nothing to do with those who persist in believing this stupid lie. That's right. If you choose lies over the truth, get out. The door is back there. Choose the one marked New Apostolic Reformation or Flat Earth door next to it. Or choose David Icke, Steve Quayle, Hagman, SGT, X22, or any of the other fine purveyors of awful lies and hallucinations. Choose any flavor of delusion that you might like, but just leave. Let's all wait for the Q followers to leave the room. Now, are we ready to continue? Great. The whole Q hoax thing was aptly described in an article by someone who specializes in creating games for adults, the running around in a maze and solving mysteries kind. He describes himself like this, quote, "I'm a game designer with experience in a very small niche. I create and research games designed to be played in reality. I've worked in alternate reality games, ARGs, LARPs, experience fiction, interactive theater, and serious games. Stories and games that can start on a computer and finish in the real world. Fictions designed to feel as real as possible, games that teach you, puzzles that come to life all around the players. Games where the deeper you dig, the more you find. Games that with rabbit holes that invite you into wonderland and entice you through the looking glass." Close quote. From his article, A Game Designer's Analysis of QAnon Playing with Reality by Reed Berkowitz. You don't need to have that kind of experience to see how the Q hoax was created. I've been watching, analyzing, and playing computer games since the 80s, and there is a class of games that succeed because they have philosophies and psychological manipulations that make them so incredibly appealing, especially the role-playing games or RPGs. And the Q hoax was just that, an RPG, a role-playing game with a twist. The way that Reed describes it is interesting. He says this, quote, "When I saw QAnon, I knew exactly what it was and what it was doing. I had seen it before. I had almost built it before. It was gaming's evil twin, a game that plays people," close quote. That is an extremely perceptive observation. In Q hoax, in the Q hoax, the player was Q, and you were the game. As the saying goes, Q followers were played like a fiddle, and I've seen lots and lots of that. Flat earthers, Mormons, Marxists, and Muslims are all extreme examples of real-life role-playing games where followers were manipulated into dancing to the tune of the game player. But Reed Berkowitz isn't done shedding light on this. He goes on to introduce a very interesting term, guided apophenia. What an interesting phrase, and as a writer, I just love new and interesting phrases, at least the ones that I like. And this one cuts to the heart of so much that is wrong with human beings. Here, read the definition of apophenia as shared with us by Reed. Quote, "Apophenia is the tendency to perceive a connection or meaningful pattern between unrelated or random things, such as objects or ideas." Close quote. I don't think that there's a single person on this planet that has not suffered from this at one time or another. In fact, I'm betting that we all have been accused of something not true because our accuser perceived a connection or meaningful pattern that just didn't mean anything. Why, just the other day, Mrs. Little accused me of doing something for her because I cleaned up some stuff. And I tell you that I am completely innocent of any charge of doing housework. It was an accident, I tell you, but I'm willing to take the credit. I always try to be good, but I rarely try very hard to be nice. It's just too much work. But when Mrs. Little wants me to do something, I do it, almost always. Anyway, where was I? Ah yes, guided apophenia. Then what Reed Berkowitz has to say about it. Reed shared some of his experiences with creating games that went seriously wrong, because the players saw meaning in perfectly random elements within the game environment. His players suffered from apophenia, and it was a problem. In fact, It's a problem for every game designer that wants to create something that people will enjoy, as opposed to leading players in frustrating circles. Here's what Reed says, quote, "If you are a designer and have puzzles and have a plot, then Apophenia, Apophenia, is a wild card you always have to be concerned about," close quote. Yeah, that's a problem. You don't want people to get distracted by, oh, look, a butterfly, and wander off track if you have a point to make or even just a destination in mind. But then Reed makes an interesting connection to the Q Hoax. Quote, "QAnon is a mirror reflection of this dynamic. Here, in QAnon, Apophenia is the point of everything. There are no scripted plots. There are no puzzles to solve created by game designers. There are no solutions. QAnon grows on the wild misinterpretation of random data presented in a suggestive fashion in a milieu designed to help the users come to the intended misunderstanding." Maybe guided apophenia is a better phrase. Guided because the puppet masters are directly involved in hinting about the desired conclusions. They have preceded the conclusions. They are constantly getting the player lost by pointing out unrelated random events and creating a meaning for them that fits the propaganda message Q is delivering. There is no reality here, no actual solution in the real world. Instead, this is a breadcrumb trail away from reality, away from actual solutions and towards a dangerous psychological rush. It works very well because when you figure it out yourself, you own it. Actually, we also call that the IKEA effect. Look it up. You experience the thrill of discovery, the excitement of the rabbit hole, the acceptance of a community that loves and respects you, because you were convinced to connect the dots yourself. You can see the absolute logic of it because you did that. This is the conclusion you arrived at. More about this later. Everyone on the board agrees with you because it's highly likely they were the ones that pointed it out to you just for that purpose. Close quote. The Q Hoax was a masterpiece of psychological manipulation. In fact, it was so good that I doubt that any quote-unquote intelligence agency had anything to do with it. Most government entities do not have the creativity that something like this would require. Always remember that big organizations always suffer from the Peter Principle. Look it up. Always. No exceptions. The Peter Principle. So, forget the intelligence thing. That one is just stupid. If you've ever watched the mistakes that the Israeli intelligence services have made, you'll know exactly what I mean. But let's think about more than just this Q hoax. Think about all the other hoaxes out there that people believe. Go on BitChute and look at all the neo-Nazis, anti-Semites, anti-Zionists, flat earthers, skin color nationalists, UFO fanatics, David Icke, radical libertarians, New Agers, and the guys who think that reptilians are a thing. BitChute is so full of such garbage that I get a kind of nausea every time I look at that site. There are some good people posting on that platform, but more than 90% of the content is one hoax after another. It's just so stupid. But back to the Q hoax. Reed Berkowitz seems to lean left in his political ideology, but he consistently makes important points throughout his article. And here's one to remember. Quote, "Real people in the government with important information to disseminate deliver it as fast as possible, usually all in one go. They don't make you solve things. They try to be as specific as possible. They are whistleblowers. Daniel Ellsberg, the Pentagon Papers, Edward Snowden, Chelsea Manning, etc." Close quote. Notice that the Q hoax did the exact opposite of what a whistleblower would do. The Q hoax was leading you on with hints and allegations that could not be proved. Real whistleblowers never do that. In the rest of his article, Reed dives into some of the psychological manipulations in the Q hoax before going on and looking at some of the Illuminati hysteria that has captured the minds of some Christians. In the early years of Omega Shock, I got caught up in some of those speculations about the Illuminati, Freemasons, and other conspiracy theories. And some of those theories have a lot of fact behind them. I know people involved in some of these conspiracies. And I've seen some of these organizations at work. Seriously, I actually have some personal evidence. So I know that they are real. But I have come to realize that they aren't nearly as effective as people think. At least, they aren't as effective as Satan would like them to be. And worse, most of the conspiracy theories out there are just plain wrong. It's time for all of us who love the truth to ask ourselves about proof. It's time to consider real evidence instead of dystopian theories about nefarious intent. Some of what people call truth is just overheated imagination. That needs to stop. If nothing else, you need to realize that we are giving too much credit to cretins. Seriously, a lot of these conspiracies are pretty stupid and badly organized. Yes, they are real. Yes, they are evil. Yes, they will kill a lot of us as they try to take over the world. History is full of accounts of morons being stupid and killing lots and lots of people in the process. It always happens like this. Always. What you need to do is make sure that you understand the warnings and signs that the Bible gives you, and not worry overmuch about what evil people do. Evil people will always do evil. Were you expecting something different? Worse, our focus on evil has distracted us from what God is doing. He knows exactly what needs to be done, and He's doing it. In fact, here's a snapshot of God's plan from Revelation. Quote, "And the 10 horns which you saw, and the beast, these will hate the harlot, and will make her desolate and naked, and will eat her flesh, and will burn her up with fire. For God has put it in their hearts to execute His purpose, by having a common purpose, and by giving their kingdom to the beast, until the words of God will be fulfilled." Close quote. Revelation 17, verses 16 to 17, New American Standard Bible, 1995 version. God is going to, and already has, put His plans into the hearts of those who are evil. I know that we like to think of Satan as the one orchestrating the events of the last days, but it's not true. Yes, Satan has a big role to play, but it is God who is the one with the plan. So, follow the plan, God's plan, not some Q hoax cooked up by a pig farmer in the Philippines. Now, let's talk security. But before I do that, I have a little update from my Friday article. Tony Koritz of minutetomidnight.com posted an interview with John Holler on YouTube. John and Tony didn't say anything that would have violated any rational community guidelines, yet YouTube took the video down anyway. It was on the YouTube playlist that I published on Friday. So when you look at that playlist, look at the deleted video. That was it. They are really getting out the ban hammer and whacking us with it. Censorship is on the rise, and they are working as hard as they can to shut us down. Just notice one important difference between Tony's YouTube channel and a Megashock. The number of subscribers on Tony's channel is larger than mine. He has almost 46,000 subscribers. I have a tiny fraction of that number, just 1,700. Smaller channels can slide through the net of censorship better than the larger ones. Eventually, they'll take down my channel too, so we all need to be migrating to Rumble. You could go to BitChute, and I probably will do that too, but the neo-Nazis and other morons on that site give me the creeps. Anyway, let's go on with what I wanted to talk about. If you aren't a little spooked by the takedown of Parler and the latest thing on minutetomidnight.com, and by the blatant social media censorship and by the calls for violence against us from the left, you aren't paying attention. They really want to shut you down and ruin your life. And if they couldn't throw us all into re-education camps, well, if they could, they would. The good thing is that there are still limits to what they can do to us. Yes, they can make us miserable. Yes, they can harass us. Yes, they can censor our speech on social media. But we aren't anywhere near an American Gulag archipelago. It's coming, but we aren't there yet. For those of you who don't think that it's coming, you need to do more reading. We're following in the footsteps of the French Revolution, the Roman Revolution, the Chinese Revolution, all the social revolutions, socialist revolutions. We're following all of those. We human beings love to repeat history because we never learn. So read up on history. Now, where was I? Yes, threats to our liberty. The important thing for all of us to know is that we are heading down that road, and there will be events in our future that will accelerate the process. And I've talked about those events for years. But there's absolutely no need to panic. That's right. Don't panic. Yes, our world is on the road to complete collapse, but we haven't reached that moment where everything falls apart yet. So now is not the time to panic. In fact, panic is really only for those who have not been paying attention and not giving thought to the situation that they are in. Panic is for those who do not know that God is in control. So you should never need to panic ever if you are paying attention. Furthermore, it's not the government that you need to be afraid of. It's your neighbor. Your friends and your family also need to be a concern. The people closest to you will be the absolutely biggest threat that you will ever face when times get bad. As I have repeatedly said over and over for years and years, if you can't trust your neighbors, you need to get new ones. That's right. When things fall apart, you will need to know that you can trust your neighbors with your life, because a bad neighbor will come and take it. I just saw a video recently of a bad neighbor who was trying to do exactly that, break down a neighbor's door to steal, kill, and destroy. That video ended well, but your video might not. Here's that video.
Now at 11, a wild shootout between a suspect and a homeowner in Hesperia. That shocking scene playing out on a home security camera. The homeowner says he was awakened this morning by somebody trying to kick in his front door. The homeowner grabbed his gun, and then the two began shooting at each other through the door. Nobody was hit. The would-be intruder took off. He was later found and arrested by San Bernardino County Sheriff's deputies. At this point, no known connection between the suspect and the home, although we are told the two are neighbors.
That's a clip titled "Hesperia Homeowner Fends Off Intruder in Gun Battle Caught on Camera" from ABC 7. And all I can say is that's awful. And we will see more of this as the world crumbles. The neighbor in that video seems a bit insane, but insanity happens when times don't go the way that you planned, especially if you don't have a belief in God. Those who fear God, and yes, I mean F-E-A-R, fear, those people, those who fear God, tend to go less insane. At least, less insane than those who do not fear God. Unfortunately, just having Christian neighbors isn't good enough. There are lots of fake Christians that don't have a shred of fear towards God and don't feel obligated to obey Him very much. You can bet that faux Christians will forget all about Jesus when the going gets tough. So now is the time to take a good hard look at your neighbors and ask yourself if you can trust them not to take your life and the lives of those you care about. If you can't trust your neighbors, it might be time to move. Just make sure to ask God for direction before making any big decision. Now, let's talk about electronic security. I've been thinking about that a lot lately, and I've been wondering about what you and I can do that we aren't already doing. So let me share a few things that you might or might not know, depending on what your background is. First, email communications are not secure. In fact, it is my understanding that most email transmitted between one domain and another is almost always wide open and in the clear. Government agencies and criminal networks, which can be the same thing, make it a point of monitoring common email ports and reading as much email traffic as possible to capture information that they can use. And it's a crime that so many email servers are allowed to transfer messages out of their domain without using secure encryption. Email servers could impose secure communications between one domain and another, but many of them don't want to. After all, as long as you don't know how vulnerable you are, you won't bother service providers with a demand to use secure email transmission. As long as you don't know how much risk there is, you won't complain and raise a fuss. Do people still use that word, fuss? But there are some things that you can do to make your email communications more secure. One of them is to always communicate sensitive information only within a domain. For instance, if someone wants to share their super secret pecan pie recipe with you, tell them to send it from their Gmail account to your Gmail account. Email sent within a domain, such as gmail.com, is generally secure. Sending something from Yahoo email to Gmail email is almost certainly not secure. Oh, and Proton Mail? Well, it's only secure within the protonmail.com domain. Just having a Proton Mail account is not enough. Everyone else that you send messages to needs to have a Proton Mail account for your communications to be secure. Otherwise, forget it. But there's also one more problem. All messages that are sent within a domain are still readable by the servers of that domain. No matter how secure that you think that your email service is, that service will always be able to read your messages. And having an account with a quote-unquote secure email service is like waving a big red flag in front of governments. Having a Proton Mail account is like telling everyone that you have something to hide. Second, you do not want email communications to be completely secure. To my absolute disgust, human beings are awful. Not all of them, maybe not even most, but there are enough human beings of uncertain parentage to make it impossible for you and I to have completely secure communications. My last job in Israel before moving back to the US was with one of the most secure email communications services in the world. Using their service, it was impossible to send a message to anyone without worrying that a criminal or intelligence service would intercept it and read what you had written. They couldn't do it. They used, the organization I worked for, they used public key infrastructure, PKI, and it is still an awesome technology that can ensure complete and utter security. In fact, this service was so secure that the criminal underworld started to use it openly. The good thing is that there was one exception to the security of their SafeMail's encrypted infrastructure. They could read all the email messages running through their system. SafeMail, the organization I worked for, didn't want to do that. They didn't want to read those emails, but they had to. Pedophiles, drug dealers, scammers, blackmailers, terrorists, and every other kind of evil under the sun have tried to use their service, only to get caught because their messages were being monitored. I remember when they discussed creating a special service that could not be monitored by them, but chose not to do that precisely because of all the evil that was trying to use their network. Now, I would trust my old boss at SafeMail, or I should say at safe-mail.net. I would trust him not to share my passwords or take advantage of any personal details that I would put in an email. He's a really good guy with lots of integrity. He certainly would not go running to the security authorities if I said mean things about the government, even the Israeli government. But I doubt that you can say the same thing about any of the other secure email providers that you might use. Oh, and if you want an example of how a persecuted group was able to communicate with its membership, look at the Falun Gong. I know exactly how they were communicating with each other. It has been 15 years since I was involved with SafeMail.net, so they probably have their own secure communications network. But in the early thousands, when the Chinese Communist Party was murdering the Falun Gong by the busload, They use the safe-mail.net network to talk to each other. The Chinese Communist Party would regularly attack safe-mail servers and take them down, but they could never break safe-mail's encryption. Everyone would tell my boss to go to the media about what China was doing to safe-mail servers, but he never did. He always assumed that the truth would get out all by itself. He was a great guy, but too much of a geek to do marketing really well. Having said that, I don't know if SafeMail is as good now as they were. It has been a while and their website hasn't changed much, and that's not a good sign. I even found some of the help files on that site that I wrote 15 years ago. I mean, I was good, but that good? Now, some have been altered, so any English errors you find are probably not mine. The interesting thing is that you could implement your own public key infrastructure and have utterly secure email communications. The information on how to do it is out there. The only thing that you need is the skill, a little programming ability, and a little money to make it happen. You could even sell your email service online. I'm curious about whether anyone actually wants to. Now, if you've gotten this far, I have only one thing left to say, and it's more important than everything else that I've said about maintaining personal security. Don't go paranoid. Seriously, paranoia will do far more harm than absolutely anything else. It would be better to stop communicating with anyone than to go down the road of paranoia. You might want to do that one day, stop communicating, but living in fear is not the way that God calls us to live. So please don't be fearful and paranoid. I know that they are out to get you, but it doesn't matter. God is literally in control of everything that is happening. You have nothing to fear if you hold him close. So be as wise as you can and do not be afraid. Enough said. That's it for this Shockcast. Again, hit like, click subscribe, and whack that little bell. And please share this video or the MP3 below. After you have done all that, leave a comment. I like seeing what you have to say about what was said here. Your input is welcome. Then, help keep Omega Shock and the Shockcast alive. There's a link below that can help you do that. I am truly grateful for all of you who have helped this ministry continue. I could not do this without you. May God bless you for your generosity. Also, subscribe to The Shock Letter at theshockletter.com and read my books for free. When Jacob Returns and Ezekiel's Fire. You do not want to get caught by what is coming.